Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Knights of the Alternate Histories. Sorry about missing another week. I had a bunch of tournaments March and halfway through April, so wasn't able to get a lot of stuff done, but I'm back. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is I really appreciate you guys, and I know this 1,000 subscribers is coming a long way, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you for 1,000 subs, and let's get into the video. The American government sends out one last broadcast, telling the states to fend for themselves. Now, this might be because of pandemic, a war just broke up the government, or simply everyone in the government just decide to leave and go their own ways. Nevertheless, the states now have to grab power and fight for it. The government won't help them no longer. They have to depend on their natural resources and their neighbors to support them. The streets of Washington, D.C. would be completely abandoned. No one would be left standing there. All of them would just be gone. No population would stay, and the government wouldn't stay either. The president would have to give an address, and overall, everything would be gone. Now the states localize their government, combine, and leave a few out. Desert gets reformed, as well as California splits up, with Jefferson gaining independence by mixing with Oregon, Washington gaining other parts of Idaho, Dakotas taking over Montana, the Northwest, the West Confederation, the UP being able, the Deep South and Georgia come back, as well as Texas grows huge, and Mexico and Canada, they take a few states as well. New Mexico becomes a border state for Deseret against both Texas and Mexico. Now, the Midwest would be the most interesting part. As all of them had such a similar culture, they would try and mix, but it just wouldn't work with their types of governments. As well as the Deep South and Georgia would also want to combine, but they felt that if they did, Florida and North Carolina would just invade them while they were taking stuff over. Meanwhile, Maryland and Virginia would start trying to rebuild the population collapse in Washington, D.C. to limited effect. The first battle would be West California versus California and South California. The Californians would fight to try and snap off the weakest member, and that would be West California. As a limited population, as well as not having the industry or the farmland, they would just be a quick treat. They wouldn't be expecting this invasion, though they would hold off by sending in a few troops to fight at a time, but there was no hope. With the last Navy battle, they would be completely cut off from supplies. They would try and ally themselves with Mexico, but Mexico wouldn't accept, and they would have to face conquering. But a lot of the Western Californians wouldn't care, as they would either go with their culture neighbors or someone who's already in the same state with them, and this would be pretty alright, though they feared what would happen when another California war breaks out. The new border would be drawn, with California now having access to some trade ports, while South California keeps most of their naval bases, as well as gains a major boost to their population, which would help offset the balance between California's main agriculture and economic space versus the large population and economic space. This would lead to, if either one of them attacked, it would be a horrible war for the Second Californian War. Deseret and Texas would also start talking, as well as making an anti-Mexico pact, fearing that Mexico would start to invade if they sensed that one of them was weak enough. They would divide up New Mexico in hopes that this new alliance, called the Alliance of Phoenix, as the peace treaty would be signed in Phoenix, would mean that they would become stronger allies together and could just attack Mexico together. But meanwhile, Georgia and the Deep South has a plan. Fearing a Texas invasion, both Georgia and the Deep South would start invading North Carolina as well as Florida, believing that if they didn't invade to make a stronger state, Texas would just take them over. They would try and do this with rapid success. Catching Florida off guard, they wouldn't have time to prep a lot of their military bases, but they would strike back hard. And North Carolina would just try and hold out for Florida to try and reach them, who's now an unlikely ally. Now, through the mountain ranges would be the best bet, but now Florida would start fighting back, and they would start making their way to try and take Savannah and knock Georgia out of the war once and for all. But North Carolina was already on the brink of falling, and it would be pretty hard for them, especially now where they're cut off from the resupply. Florida could send their navy up to try and resupply the eastern part of it, but the western part would be lost. Florida still pushing through, as well as offering more men for the North Carolinian defense, would allow them to easier fight and try and stay hold. But a problem would occur, as once North Carolina would take out, it would be 2 states against 1, and they would lose their distraction. Georgia, also being a heavy military base, would have a major problem with this, and it would be horrible for them, and they would have to start getting ready for that inevitable possibility. But now actually on the border of Savannah, when it's taken, one last push from Florida, and they can knock him out of the war. But before they can do that, the Georgian forces return, and not wanting their capital city to be taken out, they quickly charge and attack. And the Floridians wouldn't have a chance. Now, this war not being about navy means the Florida would start fighting back. And then they would fall more back and back, until eventually they would be lost. Only having a few troops remaining and their navy just trying to stop a blockade from happening, a lot of the Floridians' troops would beg for Texas or another state to try and stop them. But it would be a gruesome fight for the Panhandle to try and stop it and make it so that wouldn't be able to happen. But the Floridians would have their chance. Because the peninsula is largely swamp-based, this would allow them to be able to hold their ground and start inflicting massive casualties on their would-be oppressors. But that also means heavy casualties on their part from diseases and wildlife. Trying to hold them back long enough to not fall apart, this would lead to a situation where it's a lose-lose. Now, Florida would start getting oppressed more and more, but another thing would happen with Colorado making treaties with all of their neighbors not to get invaded that would last at least another 5 years. Meanwhile, all of the Midwestern nations, mainly the Central Western and the Northwestern, would try and think of a way to invade their neighbors, and they would largely agree with that. Meanwhile, New York would size up New England. Now with the Georgians taking more and more heavy losses, and this war raging on for years at the time with the swamps happening, stopping them from going through, the North Carolinians would start getting used to Deep South rule, and their legislation, with a little bit of help from Georgia, would also sign to become a part of the Deep South Confederation, or now just the Confederation. These states would try and make a neo-confederacy to fight back against Texas. Now it would just be Miami left to fall, and this would be really hard urban warfare. But Floridians would also start getting used to the idea. With the main part of the population being under the rule for about 2 years now, they would also start liking the idea of a good confederation against Texas, who would obviously eventually take them all out, with Desiret's help. And they would agree to that pact, but Florida would keep on fighting. And with that, the Confederation would happen, with now the former states of Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida remaking it. Their capital would of course be Savannah, and their main goal would be to start invading Virginia and possibly take out Texas if they got the opportunity. But first they would need to grow in strength, with Deseret and Texas being focused on Mexico, and the Californians still in a major chance of political chaos. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. As I mentioned, I had a bunch of tournaments, and so couldn't really get a video out, but hey, I'm back. I'm sorry if I sounded a little monotone. I'm a bit tired, so hopefully the Wacky Ideologies videos would pump me through a life again. Woo, woo. Anyways, I really enjoyed making this. I know this is long overdue, so once again, thank you for 1,000 subs, and let's get into the video. End card. You thought I made a mistake there. Anyways, hey everyone. Click on the video on the left if you want to watch an epic Poggers video. And you know, the right's pretty base too. But, you know what I say. Jazz is the worst type of music. Never listen to jazz. Anyways, bye!